Hey everybody, Kris here. This is the final episode in a series of 5 board meetings that Nate and I recorded back in 2018, all based on a phrase we learned from Trevor Ragan of Learner Lab. Common sense isn't always common practice. And we came up with 5 areas of climbing where we see that phrase holding true, and we sat down to discuss them. While I was working on my new book, Adapt, Lessons Learned Climbing 105.13s, pretty much all of these themes came up. And in fact, what we're discussing today, principle versus prescription, and where we see each of these things in climbing, pretty much permeates the entire book. It's sort of the thesis of this series, and really how I prepare for climbing in general, and how I think 90 or 95% of your preparation should look as well. But that's much harder than it sounds. All right, let's get into it.
It's time to build.
You know, just to reiterate where this all started, so much of what we see, so much of what we hear, we think, I didn't need to be told that. It's just common sense.
Yeah.
And we as coaches, as people who put out a lot of content and media, think, do we really need to say this? It's just common sense. But the reality is, and we first heard this phrase from our friend Trevor Ragan from Train Ugly at trainugly.com, that common sense isn't always common practice. And I think that's a all-time mega quote.
Totally.
As far as I'm concerned. And I think it shows up in so many places in the climbing world, in the, the sports world, the training world in general. And right now we're going to be talking about principles versus prescriptions. And this is kind of a tough topic to pin down. We were just sitting here going over notes and we're like, this is going to be a tough one. I don't know, but we're going to see what happens here. I mentioned in the previous episode, train where you are versus where you want to be, that I think, especially in today's world, there's a lot of relevance to this topic of principle versus prescription, because we want everything in little quick sound bites. We want them in 140 characters if you're on that 30 word over there. And we want to be told what to do, and quickly. This shouldn't be this long process. Just fucking tell me how to get there. And prescriptions don't necessarily work in these cases. But if you want to catch someone's attention on the Instagram or on the Facebook or on the Twitter, you prescribe. You say, here's what you have to do. Here's the absolute. Here's the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that catches people's attention. And it's a great way to catch people's attention, but you're really only talking to a pretty small percentage of those people. And in my mind, that's fairly dangerous. And that's why we try not to talk in prescription. Even when we're writing training plans, I've battled with myself about, do I sell these ebooks, that are prescriptions?
Mm-hmm.
And I try to narrow it down as much as possible. Like, this is for the 512 climber who's climbed a fair amount of mid 512, wants to climb 513. And even then, when people email me, I'm like, tell me what your strengths and weaknesses are. Tell me what your goals are. I can send you in a better direction. Mm-hmm. Climb 513 might not be the plan for you. So even then, when I'm being I'm delineating who I'm prescribing to, even then it makes me nervous. But some people are just like, I'm prescribing all damn day long. I'll just throw it out there on Instagram and everybody, here's the secret. This is the key. That scares me a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it should. What do you view as the most dangerous prescriptions that you see going out and climbing?
things where you're telling people this is the way to do it. And I guess that's a prescription in general. So not a really specific example, but again, we've talked about climbing is a really complex sport, and
It's very personal.
it's very personal, and you can make things work via several different avenues. Like your example of Daniel on Instagram, I think it was, saying this is the crux move of biography. It requires this and this and this and this, which just so happened to be my strongest 4 attributes.
Mm-hmm.
However, other people have climbed it who those are not their strongest attributes, and they would probably say it requires finesse and the ability to really stand on your feet and get your hips into the right position. So being that prescriptive, saying this is the way you have to do it, this is the way you must choose to go to make progress, I think not only can that be dangerous physically, but it risks mental damage and emotional damage to people who don't have those factors and are just like, should I just give up? I'm not that strong. I can't deadlift 3 times body weight. What am I going to do?
Oh, yeah. Or, a great example is like one-arm dead hangs. Like there are metrics and standards out there.
That's a really good example, actually.
Like, yeah, there are metrics and standards out there that for some people are just unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is a standard that you should be able to, if you want to climb 514, like 14A, you need to be able to one-arm dead hang a 1-pad edge for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Like I'm here to tell you that's bullshit. Like for some people, they might need to be able to do that with like plus 10 pounds. But, I would say the mass majority of people like probably never need to get that strong to be able to climb 14A or B or maybe even C. Like I know multiple V13 climbers who cannot do that.
Yeah. I know a whole lot of double-digit climbers who can't even begin to do that.
Yeah. And I have worked with people who've been discouraged because they said, I can't meet these metrics, which means I can't climb my goal projects.
Yeah.
Like it was 1 + 1. Like it was that simple to them. Like if they could not do this, that meant they wouldn't even go try. Like to them, it was not even worth it because they could not measure up to this. And to me, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Metrics in general are scary. I'm not the world's biggest fan of metrics. I understand their usefulness. Well, at least I think I understand their usefulness. And I'm willing to give them more of a chance. I think that in climbing, again, it's so complicated. You can get to the same results via so many different avenues that metrics are really, really difficult to come by. And in our very early, very, very preliminary, largely guesswork, I'm going to go ahead and throw all that out there. Cutting in here really quick for a heads up. We're many, many years past our initial forays into data and metrics, and we have a pretty healthy set of climber data now. And I've also had a much more nuanced conversation with our data guy, Dale Wilson. The episode is called Climbing Performance Metrics. If you would just want to punch that into your podcast app, you will find it, but the link will also be there in your show notes. It's not that we've changed our ideas. This is just a more nuanced conversation. All right, back to the episode. In all the measuring we've done, it appears to be so much all over the board that coming up with an average is unfair.
It's insane.
And telling people you need to meet this metric to be at this level because it's the average of this giant spread out group of people, that seems equally, doubly unfair, because so many people are never going to meet that metric and still be able to perform at that level and higher.
Yeah. Or even so, like they may hit some of those metrics and they say, well,
and not be able to perform.
I must be a terrible rock climber because I hit
Right.
those metrics. But there are some people who can tests can be cheated. Tests can be some people are really good at taking tests.
Yeah.
Like you can train for tests, like in metrics. Even ones where you shouldn't be able to, like everything is trainable.
Yeah, you can hack any test. One of the podcasts I listen to often, the Performance Podcast, with Will Fleming and Robert Remedios. They talk about in one of their episodes the NFL Combine, which is a big money test essentially.
Yeah.
If you do well on this combine, you get picked up by an NFL team, then you stand to make millions of dollars. You can be a top prospect. You can perform at a really high level, but if you don't do well on the combine, your stock drops. So there are companies who charge top dollar to teach you to hack the NFL Combine, that you could be a low performer, someone who's not even on the radar of the recruits, go to this school for 4 or 6 weeks or whatever, where they teach you how to do better on the NFL Combine tests. And then all of a sudden your stock goes through the roof because you just outperformed the best performers in the league on the test.
Yes.
You're going to get on the field and you're going to tank, but you just made $1.5 million signing bonus.
Boom.
So, that's a really good example of hacking these tests. And then the metrics don't tell you a thing.
Yeah. And so I think there is an importance for metrics and keeping them. And I think they're individualized.
Yep.
Like
I measure against yourself.
Exactly. Like to me, that from what I've seen, what we've seen from measuring with our own athletes, I mean, like comparing multiple people is startling. You can account for body weight, for training age, for all different things. Man, it's all over the place.
Yeah, I have 5'14" rock climbers who can't do pull-ups.
Yeah. I have 5'12" climbers who can hang with more weight than I can.
Yeah.
And it's just like, but that's just it. Like they can hang that much, but when they actually try and climb, like they can't leverage it onto actual holds.
Right.
Like there's some sort of disconnect. And so it's like, that's something that needs to be worked on. But if I simply looked at it and said, oh, wow, you can hang an extra 100 pounds on you. Like good news, your hand strength is great. We don't need to worry about that. It's like, that's not the thing. They actually need to be, a lot of them actually have to spend a ton of time on fingery, like hard hand intensive climbs so they can actually learn how to use their hands.
Yeah. And we're talking a lot, you could very easily say, oh, well, there's outliers, there are exceptions to every rule. But what I'm seeing with all these numbers is that everyone looks like an outlier compared to what the average is.
Mm-hmm. Are we just calling ourselves the average? We're the norm.
Not ourselves at all. Like if I took all of the numbers and averaged them together, out,
then everyone seems like they're all over the place.
Yeah, it seems like everyone is an outlier. So this average number becomes unfair.
Totally.
And maybe it's just that we have too small a data set at this point. But it's enough to give me pause. And we're spending a lot of time in the beginning of this harping on prescription. Let's talk a little bit about what we mean by principles and, just to make sure that we're delineating between the two and we can tell the difference. So what do we mean by principles?
Principles are these underlying rules that kind of govern everything. They are the basis that we can judge, are we doing the things correctly? So if I was to reference...
Right, like deadlift 2 times body weight.
Principle. Yeah. Doesn't matter if the first day you ever deadlift, you can deadlift 2 times body weight, you're good. But so to use metrics, to me, a more principled approach is saying, I'm going to track my own numbers, and I'm going to reference them off myself. Am I getting better? Did I move the needle? If here are all my, all the things I measured, and I think having these big in-depth measurements are awesome. I think they're great. And I think doing them maybe once a year or something like that, that can be great. Cause then you can check in and say, hey, did I get better?
Yep.
I think it can be very easy to say, where do I compare with other people? Because that like...
Yeah, that's a powerful thing for people, man.
Yeah, but it can be a bad road to go down. Like most people I've talked with have come away disappointed when they compare themselves using metrics.
My stock answer has become, which people do you want me to tell you about? The people you're better than or people you're worse than? Because I can give you both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which do you want to hear?
But what it comes down to is, I mean, the principle is like, am I getting better? Like, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how everyone else around me performs. Like, is my training making me better? And so that's just it. Like, it doesn't matter if I can't hang body weight on a one pad edge. If my training means that I can slowly get a little bit stronger, just tiny bits, and I can get to the point where I'm climbing V14, who gives a fuck what my metrics are?
Yeah.
Like, compared to everyone else. If they're improving for myself and I am climbing better because of it, that is what matters.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I talked to Dan John this last summer and
still jealous.
And when I read his book,
Now What?
Now What? One of the things he talks about that I thought was really cool and really important is that you should measure something. He essentially says, I don't care what that thing is. As long as it somehow pertains to your performance goals, measure something, train, measure it again. If the number goes up, then you're doing good.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter what that thing is. It doesn't matter what the next guy did. It doesn't matter what the average number of people do. Should there be standards? Sure, maybe there should be. I think that could be a really important thing. Do we have enough information to come up with those standards on our own? Obviously not, because nearly every standard that's been thrown out for rock climbing is taken from somewhere else. It's taken from another sport. It's not taken from doing a study of a bunch of rock climbers to see what they can deadlift.
Because most rock climbers can't deadlift.
God knows it would be 0.75 body weight.
Yeah. Yes.
So all of our supposed standards that we've been espousing are taken from elsewhere. And I think there's some validity in that. But it shouldn't be taken as the gospel. So I think the point here is this principle that we're talking about is measure something, move the needle, then you're making progress. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to hit a very specific number with a very specific thing.
Yeah. And this goes exactly what we were just talking about. Train for where you are and not for where you want to be. And where you want to be could be anything else. But if where you are is, metrics that may not line up with anything, like where you want to be, it doesn't matter. Like you're just trying to make yourself better. Like, do what is good for you.
Yep, totally. Other principles. Let's keep on that. I've got a question about prescriptions, but let's keep on principles right now. Are there principles you think are really important?
Master the basics. In my mind, that's key.
Yeah. Why is it that in climbing that seems to be overlooked? And in so many other sports, you look at Wayne Gretzky, famous for warming up the same way since he was a youth hockey player. Jerry Rice, who was one of the best wide receivers in history, did very basic drills his entire career. So many great athletes do the same basic drills throughout their entire careers. I've never heard of Kris Sharma doing basic drills. Why is that?
Well, I think one thing you just said sort of highlights it is those are great athletes. And I'm not saying Kris Sharma isn't.
Kris Sharma isn't a great athlete?
I don't even know if he would consider himself an athlete. But I think there are
Fair enough.
I think there are a lot of climbers who do that. Like, they would never say that they are doing drills. but you watch their intention when they warm up.
Right.
And they are so intentional, and it's unbelievable. And you can see it when it happens. And like, they may never voice that they are building these pyramids or that they are working their weaknesses.
Yeah, totally. BJ warms up with sloth monkeys. If I told him he was doing sloth monkeys, he would leave the gym. But it's what he's doing. I watch him in there. He's doing contrast warm-ups, aka sloth monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the way he warms himself up to be able to move the way he wants to move.
Yeah.
Just intuitively.
Like watching a lot of great climbers, man, they do so many of these things, and they've made it to where it's this unconscious part of their being, to where they just go through all these steps and they cover so many of the basics. They may not think of it like that. They may not recognize it like that, but it's just ingrained in them at this point.
Right.
So yeah, that's just it. I think great athletes do it. But I think not mastering the basics is a common issue for everyone in every walk of life. I mean, that's business, that's relationships, that's diet, that's everything. It's a hard thing because, for multiple reasons, like, God, it'd be really nice if magic bullets worked.
Yeah.
If I could just pick one thing and be like, oh, I just have to do this and it'll make me better, cool. Instead of being like, well, I need to shore up like these 15 different things and like do them to a reasonable amount. And that's going to give me a reasonable amount of progress over time. And if I do it for long enough, I'm going to make my goal in a couple years.
Yeah.
Like that's I don't want to swallow that pill. Like, give me some like forearm implants or something. I don't know.
I've got a good example of someone who is working on the basics, even though they've essentially mastered them already. I was in rifle this past summer, and it was a who's who of American sport climbing. You name a good American sport climber, they were there. All of them.
Kris Hampton.
He was there.
Oh man.
He was
everyone.
He was flailing like crazy, not mastering any basics, but he was there. But Dave Graham at the end of the day was getting on Pumperama, which is popular 13A at the Arsenal and rifle, way below Dave Graham's level. And he's done it a lot of times. But we were talking before he got on it, and he was like, oh man, I haven't been sport climbing a lot. I know I'm going to get pumped. I'm going to get on this and really go for it. Like really try, because I know I'm going to get pumped stupid. I want to remember what it's like to get pumped and try hard. And I was like, that's cool. He's training where he's at. He knows he's just been bouldering. I know I'm going to get pumped on 13A. So I'm going to work on going hard on a level where I can focus. I know I'm going to send, I'm going to have to battle, but I think I can send this. And this is what my focus is going to be. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to do this to show off. It wasn't just, I'm just going to run a random lap on here. It was, I've got to focus. I'm going to go up and do it. And it was fun to watch because he's in the upper crux. His elbows are above his head. He's obviously in battle mode, but he slows it all back down. He pulls it back together, and he looks effortless to the top. You could see the moment he remembered how to do it, and it all came back together. So, if Dave Graham, who is essentially a wizard, needs to work on the basics, why don't the 5'11" climbers need to work on the basics anymore? I think they do. So I think that's a great principle. Keep practicing the basics, focus on the basics. They should always be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you become the best climber you can be? You dream big. You plan your trip and pack your bag. You get on the climb. You try. You make mistakes. You adjust. You fall off and pull back on and fall off again. You care enough to ask why. You learn. You adapt over and over again. In my new book, Adapt, Lessons Learned Climbing 105.13s, I dig deep into not only the decisions made, hurdles confronted, and lessons learned, but also the life situations and experiences that led me there. I tell the story of how this big goal came to be and how I reached it on the morning of my 50th birthday. Whether you're a weekend warrior, like I was for most of my climbing career, or a full-time climber trying to push your limits over the long term, this book will help you learn the important lessons without making the same mistakes that I did. PowerCompanyClimbing.com/adapt, or the link is right there in your show notes. Yeah, pretty much all the things we've kind of gone over are principle versus prescription in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's sort of the direction that we at Power Company Climbing take, is we try to be very mindful of the correct prescription, but I think we operate on a very principle-based philosophy.
We definitely try to, where we recognize it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tricky. You know, I think this whole conversation is tricky, but things like move well, you know, maybe that fits under mastering the basics. But like you mentioned earlier, move well doesn't mean move with straight arms. It doesn't mean keep your hips close to the wall. It doesn't mean you should always be drop kneeing or you should always be square. There is no always. It's not a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. You know, moving well can mean lots of things. So being aware of that, recognizing when a move didn't feel like it was done well and trying to figure out what it was and come up with a better way to move is the important part. So you could go principle, all sorts of directions.
You can. I think there are a lot of, I think when it comes down to it, a lot of the things fall under just a handful of the main ones, like what we've talked about. Something you just touched on, which is, I think a principle is, watch out for absolutes. Like, I fear absolutes. When someone says always do this or never do that, first thing I do is I say, okay, what are they trying to sell to me?
Yeah.
And the next thing is, it's like, is this something brand new to them that they're still like in the honeymoon stage with?
Yeah, that's like a really great point.
And to me, those two alone like cover a large bulk of when someone says always, never, every time, things like that. Like, they're trying to sell you something, or they're just like a little too infatuated with something in the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, be careful.
Which we're all guilty of.
Totally. I mean, 100%. Like, there are so many things that, I mean, like right now I'm reading through Top Dog, and it says on the science of competition. So everything I see, I'm seeing it through the bias of competition. And I'm like, oh, I totally understand. This is a close competition. That's why I'm thriving right now. I need to find more friends who are climbing right at my level, because I'm sending a lot of projects currently. So totally. I mean, we're all guilty of it, but these are just things that you want to try to keep in mind.
Are there popular prescriptions that you see recently?
Oh, that's a good question. You give your answer first. I'll think on this.
I don't have an answer. That's why I'm asking you. I think, and maybe I'm guilty of perpetuating this myth to a degree as well, but I think the always be strength training is a myth. I think it's a prescription that doesn't necessarily fit, because I can come up with times when I don't want to be strength training. I shouldn't be strength training. Mm-hmm. You just had one. That look on your face, you're like, oh shit, light bulb just went off.
Yes.
Hit me with it.
Do what makes you happy. No, I'm serious. Like,
okay.
Is
this a principle or a prescription?
This is a prescription.
Okay.
And I don't think it's a principle.
Okay.
Like, because here's the thing. Like, and I very much strongly believe this. When you train hard, training isn't fun. Like, there are times when training can be fun, and it can be type 2 fun.
Yeah.
But man, like, and don't get me wrong. Like if I'm training for bouldering, that shit's always fun. Like, because training for bouldering is easy.
Mhm.
Like, but if you're training for sport climbing,
oh man,
it's the worst.
I used to love it. Not
Like-
anymore. Not anymore.
Oh man, like hard power endurance work or hard endurance work, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's not fun. Like if I only did what was fun, I would never sport climb again for the rest of my life. Like I would always remain out of shape and I'd be a boulderer. But when I and not only that, like trying things at your limit, like it doesn't to me register as immediate fun. Like I get nervous. Like if I'm about to tie
Sure.
in for, a red point effort on a big 110-foot pitch and like there's a crux at the top, like I'm nervous. It is not an immediate joy. It reminds me of back when I used to race or like do different types of competitions. Like it's not enjoyable. It's not fun in the moment.
Yep.
Like it is a thing that like you have to do though. And it's all a part of it. And so I think this goes everything from training to trying hard red points. Like there are times where you're going to be nervous, like you might be uncomfortable, but it's like that is what it takes for you to move forward.
Yeah, totally. I think a prescription that pops into my head that is, I don't know if it's popular or is if something is hated by lots of people, that's still popular, right?
I mean, a lot of people know about it, so yeah.
Yeah, it's still popular. That means I've always been popular.
Yeah.
No, I think the idea of you shouldn't run is a prescription that I think is false. Is it going to necessarily help your climbing? Not necessarily. It could. There is evidence that it could.
Mhm.
I've been talking to Eric Hurst lately. I've been running a little lately myself. Am I convinced that it's going to help me? No. I'm willing to give it a try. However, I have had several clients who I've said, yeah, go run because they love it. It's what keeps them sane. It's what allows them to go train for climbing because it puts them into a place where they're okay spending their time training for climbing. They feel like they've done what they need to do. In that case, they should go running.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the prescription of don't run for climbing is a bad one. And I think there's lots of those.
Totally.
I just don't fit everybody.
I can think of a bunch right now just off the top of my head. Like anytime someone says, oh, you need to be climbing at this level before you can do this. Like you need to be V5 climber before you can campus board, or you need to be climbing X level before you do this, or you need to have this strength before you do that. Like you just can't, like you can't throw that around. Like
I understand it. Like I understand prescriptions because I've written things, and when you're writing, you don't get the chance to spend these, 45 minutes all total throughout this whole series. It's like 4.5 hours or something of conversation to flush it all out. You get one sentence.
Yeah. And
so you have to say something.
And it has to apply to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do.
So I get the prescriptions, I understand why they're there. When they're in the situation like you shouldn't campus until you can climb V5. There are cases where someone who's climbing V3 might be able to go campus. And there are situations where people who are climbing V7 shouldn't be campusing.
For sure.
But you have to come up with something general to say when you're presenting it. So I get that. There's some prescriptions, however, things like you should never run. Things like you should never hangboard with a closed crimp.
Oh, I disagree with that.
Things like that are just incorrect. you know, that don't even need to be said. You don't need to say you should never hang board with a closed crimp. You know, you can very easily just say, if you're going to hang board with a closed crimp, be pretty careful.
Yeah.
You know, really think it over. You can say that. It doesn't have to be this absolute one size fits all prescription.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I mean, that's taken us down a road that's gotten a lot of people in trouble, where a common one that came up forever was, oh, you should climb open hand as much as possible because open hand strengthens your crimps and, you know, it's going to keep you healthier. And the problem is, I know a lot of people who spent years only open hand climbing, and the second they had to start grabbing crimps, they got injured.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
That didn't actually make you more resilient. What would have made you more resilient was getting your body used to that type of stress, like of crimping. Like, yes, you can overdo it and get hurt crimping, but if you never do it when you need it, you're going to be in trouble.
Right.
So, yeah, those big absolutes, like, they'll get you in trouble.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. I think we've sort of hit on the principle behind prescriptions. These big absolutes, big, always one size fits all. This is what you should do no matter what. Mm-hmm. Anytime you see that, be wary, look at it critically, try to decide if it's for you or not. You know, there aren't many things that should actually be prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we should be looking at the principles, these overarching ideas that, when molded, can fit nearly everyone. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah. Do you have a favorite principle?
Favorite principle?
I'd tell you mine, but you'll be mad because I stole it.
No, you better go ahead then, so I can
keep the goal.
Oh, God damn it.
I told you.
Yeah, that is a really good one. The goal is to keep the goal the goal.
Yes. Classic Dan John.
Yeah. And in case that sounds confusing, the idea is that, you know, if you're strength training for climbing, the goal should not become get stronger for strength training.
The goal is to get to strength train for climbing, to get stronger for climbing.
Yeah. If you're improving at climbing, then you're doing the right thing. Doesn't mean drop all your climbing work so that you can reach that 2 times body weight deadlift. It means do your strength training. If it's improving your climbing, you're doing the right thing. And then you're keeping the goal the goal. Really, this is what it all comes down to. Principles. And I try very hard not to be too prescriptive in the things that I put out there, despite the fact that being prescriptive will nearly always get more clicks. It comes back to the goal is to keep the goal the goal. My goal is not to gather clicks. My goal is to help climbers learn. If you want more board meetings, there are a lot of bonus episodes in our Patreon, and patrons get at least 2 bonus episodes every month. The link is right there in the description. And we'll be mostly off of this main feed for the next month or so while I work on my climbing history podcast, Written in Stone, prep a few new YouTube videos, and start digging into goal setting. The patrons, of course, will continue getting episodes. And if you want to check out the new book, Adapt, it's now on Amazon and Kindle in case shipping from the U.S. is prohibitive for you. But if you're in the U.S., you can find it at powercompanyclimbing.com/adapt, or the link is right there in your show notes. You'll also find links to both Nate and I on YouTube and a link to our newsletter, The Current, where every month we try to connect the dots between all of the concepts we're currently working with and help you learn, grow, and excel.
This time